Hi, my name is Matthew Herzberg, and this is the Myopia Mindset. On this episode of the podcast, I ask the question, did we drop the ball on the myopia epidemic? And the reason why I'm asking this question is because at the time I recorded this episode, I had accidentally come across another podcast that was discussing the myopia epidemic. And that was done independent of any optometrist or orthokeratologist or myopia management expert. And I decided to bring Dr. Cary Herzberg onto the episode to discuss this with me. All of that is in the regular version of this episode. If you're a paid supporter of the Myopia Mindset, there's even more to this discussion between Cary and I. All right, so let's get to the episode. All right, welcome to the Myopia Mindset. This is a podcast where, yes, myopia matters, but also the mindset of the practitioner, the academic, and an industry professional in our space is what also matters. And this is a podcast where we are delving deep into the long-form discussions about what's impacting our industry and the people who are working in the myopia industry. I'm Matthew Herzberg. I'm your host, and I have with me my usual co-host, Cary Herzberg. Cary, welcome back to the program.
Well, thanks, Matt. It's great to be here.
Yeah, great. Very, very glad to have you. For the uninitiated, Cary is my father. He is one of the pioneer orthokeratologists, myopia management specialists. He's been doing myopia management, specifically Ortho-K, for over 40 years. He's participated in several studies around myopia management and orthokeratology. He formed the American Academy of Orthokeratology and Myopia Control and was a key player in forming the international equivalent of the American organization. And many practitioners has cited him as a direct source of inspiration for them finding their own myopia mindset and helping them be successful in their practice. And Cary, I have this was kind of like a last minute episode idea, but I thought it was really important because to kind of break it down for the audience, one of the things in my 20 years in this industry, you and I developed the AAOMC together. Vision. I was the administrator for Vision by Design, which at one point in time was called the Super Bowl of myopia management.
Yep.
So I have a lot of experience in this industry as well. And whenever I've worked with doctors or talked with doctors in this space who are interested in doing myopia management, I often stress the idea that like the public really doesn't know that much about what we're talking about. Like when we cite the myopia epidemic, right? There's always that key piece in every PowerPoint presentation you've been seeing in the last, 5 to 10 years. By 2050, half of the world's population is going to be myopic. And I know that that number has adjusted, over the last couple of years. But I cannot stress enough that we need to understand how the public and how other professionals, other people in other disciplines or other industries perceive what this problem is and how we're really not transmitting the message well enough. And so I've restarted this podcast, and ever since then, I've started getting back into podcasting as a whole. So I've started listening to some of the old podcasts I used to listen to years ago. And one of those podcasts is one of my old favorites, which is called the Skeptics Guide to the Universe. It's an OG podcast. It's been around for a long time. And I was like shocked to hear on their episode of number 1003, I think it is, that was released on September 28th of 2024, that one of their final segments was about the myopia epidemic. And I was like, oh, wow, this is amazing. Like I've been around the myopia epidemic for 20 plus years. It's amazing to finally hear it out in the public, So right. I thought, I got to send this to my dad. We got to talk about it on the podcast. We got to get this discussion going because I think it's important for clinicians, academics, and people in our industry to see how the public is receiving the message, or are they receiving the message? So I sent the podcast episode over to you and I said, I'll put a link to it in the show notes. I said, the segment starts roughly at this time, timestamp. Give it a listen. Tell me what you think. And should we talk about it? So I want to get your just like rough overview. How do you think they did on the conversation about the myopia epidemic?
Well, it's interesting because they handle it really well from the standpoint of the research. I love the way that they do this, asking the questions of the participants and how they feel like what's the reason for this myopia epidemic. And so they went through the literature, they went through all the studies they've done, and they actually correctly got to the correct assumption. It's all we really know now is this lack of sunlight.
Right.
It's really the instigator, and it's really easy to. Well, it's not easy, but there is a cure here by just getting kids outdoors. It's over. That's an oversimplified answer, but yes, they came to all those conclusions. They argued through it very logically, and they went through all the different studies. You think it's computers, you think it's this, or you think it's that. And so I was very impressed with the way how they handled the topic, and then of course the responses back and forth. And of course the host was very nice to because he would congratulate each one on what their premise was, what they thought it was. I mean, he doesn't embarrass his panel. He actually supports them. Yeah. So that helps them come up and have the courage to come up and throw something out there, Though I have a feeling that these people are well versed on that, and that they have a really thick skin. That's why they're skeptics to begin with. However, what really was the thing that was my jaw dropped on was that they don't view myopia as being a disease. They they said, let's take on some real diseases here. That's nice to talk about myopia, and you may need glasses or whatever, but it's, let's concentrate on real diseases here. So, hey, that's an eye opener because it's like a glimpse into what the public is actually seeing.
Exactly.
It's a great window here for us to take this seriously, but most of the public, or at least some of the public doesn't. Right. And I think we're kind of missing, something here. I think it's kind of like a beacon out there saying, if we can't get the public interested in myopia as a disease, we have a real problem here doing myopia management, because nobody's going to take it seriously.
And that's why I brought this to you and why I'm bringing it to the larger audience. Like I want our audience to understand that this is not like a takedown of their episode. No. We're not being critical of them. But I think that this is a great example of, because the individuals on this podcast are very well read, intelligent. They follow the science. They're very articulate. They have a segment at the end of their podcast of every episode called Science or Fiction, where they weigh the value of, 2 to 3 items. Normally, 2 of them are science. 1 of them is fiction made up by the host normally. And it's a great example to show you of like how really difficult it is to parse through information that you may be getting from the rest of the world in order to figure out what exactly is true or false in this situation.
Well, you wonder here too about, this is a grand failure. I mean, if this is the case, if this is more prevalent than this is a grand failure for all of us, because it's really like, all the resources we spent, all the going out to the public, not just on myopia, but just going out to the public and addressing these things. Yeah. The message isn't getting across, if this is the truth. I mean, our associations, whoever is the spokesperson, that's been the spokesperson for this, it's not happening. And it occurs to me, when I look at other successful campaigns, I mean, certainly, you talk about, I like the orthodontia model always when I talk about what we're doing with myopia management and ortho K. Right. I think it's a natural for us to associate with that. I mean, they went after tooth decay and made it a number 1 thing on the. You knew what this was seriously, right? They do, and they had partners with that, like Crest Toothpaste and others that really participated with them and to get the point across. But we're really lacking that here with myopia. We don't have that message. That messaging isn't there. We have to hit I worked for a guy named Newton Wesley, who many would consider to be one of the greatest eye doctors that ever lived. I had the honor of running his academy, his association, the National Eye Research Foundation, for a while. And he would, he didn't bother with doctors. He was the guy who invented the modern contact lens with 2E. He had the first patent on it. He went barnstorming across the country to the public. He said, if you create the demand within the public, then they'll bring it to the eye doctors. He didn't even bother with the eye doctors at that point. He was going straight to the public. And I think therein lies some of this problem here. It's not that the information isn't important. It's just that it's not getting out. You know,
Right.
the idea
Yeah.
that this avoidable disease is preventable, and you know, in many cases you can do mitigation on it and lessen the possibility that your patient may have, as they get older, have these other problems that occur with it.
Right.
That message is not happening for whatever reason. And I, you know, I just like, we're sitting in our silver towers expecting, you know, the parting of the Red Sea or something. And it's not
Right.
going to happen unless we get up and off of our duff and start doing something about it.
I completely agree with you. You know, as someone who as a kid worked in your practice as a pioneer orthokeratologist, a myopia management specialist, somebody who was ringing this bell about the myopia epidemic even before we had the terminology specifically for it. And as the executive director, previous executive director of the AAOMC, you and I, along with our board of directors and our members, participated in changing the vocabulary of this situation and bringing myopia to the forefront and help creating it as a buzzword in optometry and in our industry. And I remember having conversations with our board of directors back then. And this is years and years and years ago, about like, should we be focused on going directly to the public? You know, like, is there any merit in that?
You can do that. It's expensive, but you could look at how, you know, look what they did in the dental industry with Crest. I think there's a way of doing that in our industry, that a company that would want to go through that and promote their products and talk about myopia, teach the myopia that we want them to teach about what the problems are with this thing, the prevention of it, or the control of it. I think that's very possible with the, you know, to both make it successful on both ends, as far as being a product that's successful, making them money, and then a product also that like informs, you know, the public about these problems. I think that would be the best marriage, actually. And you know, how that finally presents itself, I don't know what the final rendition of that will be, but there's certainly a possibility. You know, I was thinking about it after listening to that. You know, I grew up with Mr. Magoo. You know,
You
know, the hapless Mr. Magoo. The very, if anybody doesn't know, the big thick lenses. You know, God knows he's probably -8 or more. You know,
he was a cartoon character.
Yeah, the cartoon character.
Yeah.
I think you can still see him today, and that's like the laughable Mr. Magoo. That's like still myopia is not being perceived. You know, it's this other thing. It's more of a difficulty seen vision wise, and all its implications. Not the fact that retinal and eye health is being threatened by this. You know, actually threatened by this. So, and I think for a lot of our patients, certainly our most motivated patients, are the ones that the parents are bringing the kids in. They've already been nearsighted, they've already experienced it, but some of them have retinal detachments, other kinds of problems, and they understand this. But you got to teach that to everybody, you know, that lesson, what that means, and that you know, this is not, like I said, no amount of myopia is acceptable.
Right. Well, okay, so, you know, let's go through. I've sectioned off pieces of the conversation. I've listened to that segment of the episode a couple of times now. So I want to address certain things that they talked about and their perceptions of them. But what I'd like to do first, before we jump into that, is I say this often, and I can't stress it enough. And I'm echoing Nick Despotidis when he said, you know, look, there is a myopia epidemic, but before that, we have we have an obesity epidemic, and that is not, we haven't solved that. You know, you can communicate that messaging to parents about an obesity epidemic, and things don't change. So it's like, you know, I want to stress this, is like, we need to redouble our efforts here from top to bottom, industry, clinician, academics, all of us. We need to double down on our efforts to communicate what the myopia epidemic is and why this is important. Because even if, you know, science-based, learned, intelligent professionals don't fully understand what we're talking about, and you know, then we drop the ball. I feel like once again we dropped the ball again. You know, so I'm kind of putting that out as a challenge in the myopia industry. If you do myopia management, this needs to be important. We need to tell the world about this. Because, you know, and we're going to go into it. So, all right. So let's start with the beginning of it. I thought it was interesting that the initial conversation had elements of like, is this an accurate diagnosis?
Yeah. Is this for real? Is this Yeah.
Because there is the artifact of diagnosis, right?
Right.
Around, like,
Right.
so like I cite, you know, vaccines and autism, right? So like
Mm-hmm.
there are people that say, well, how do you explain the growth of autism from this time period and this time period? And there's several ways that you can explain that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So way back in the day, autism was way less reported than it is now. The definitions for autism have been greatly expanded, and we've become better at identifying autism and what that means for greater society. So I think that's what they were referencing in that segment. Is myopia an artifact of diagnosis, or is this
Right.
real? Going all the way back from like the 1950s, which is when they
Yeah.
began citing
Right.
myopia screenings, I think in the 1950s or 1960s. So what do you think
Yeah.
about that?
Well, I think it's a valid question. I mean, are you just not diagnosing them? Are they out there and you're just not seeing them?
Right.
So, and I think they answer that very appropriately to say, no, it's not that at all. It's not the growth in myopia, the incidence going from 2 to 4% to over 20% now in the U.S. is, and I think that's understated, but anyway, that's something real. And they said, well,
Right.
can it be genetics? And they said it's too fast. So
Right.
they really answered the questions we were answering. It's like look, watch
Yeah.
ourselves in the 80s here.
Right.
They were answering those questions just, which is very impressive because they went through it really quickly, and they threw the stuff out that was relevant. That wasn't relevant. They threw, they embraced what they felt was the case. So they
Right.
quickly dismissed the fact that it's not been underdiagnosed. It's just grown,
Right.
expanded, and you're right. They started with the 50s being reliable data.
Right, right. And they went into the different causes, and
Hmm.
and they said, is it devices? Is it focusing
Right.
specifically on computer screens? Is it toxins or,
They
environmental
even brought up the
plastics?
point that that you were doing near point close work different ways before with computers, and they said
Right,
they still had myopia increasing even with doing, without computers. I
right,
remember that part of that. They did a really nice job, and I recommend that our doctors, our listeners, actually tune in on this thing
for sure.
and get get their own handle on what was going on there. But yes, they definitely ruled all that stuff out, and they just they came to the point that we did, that yes,
Right.
we have a problem, with myopia.
Yeah, yeah. What did you think of, the ending, because they threw out all sorts of, potential causes, and the host said,
Hmm.
the short answer is we don't know
Right.
what the causes are from a clinician perspective,
Right.
because you've been treating kids with myopia for over 40 years now. You do orthokeratology, you've done atropine, you're an expert on all of these things. So like, how do you respond to that of like, we don't know, like from a clinician point of view, because their response is based on the studies that the host read and then, interpreted to the panel. From a clinician
Yeah.
perspective, based on what you've seen in your patients,
Well,
what are the causes?
yeah, there's a number of studies that I look at, and one is the fact that kids that go through higher education, kids that, Jewish kids that go through the yeshiva, where there's a lot of close work compared to kids that don't study Talmud. And they find that these kids are quite a bit more nearsighted than than everyone else around them. Genetically speaking, they're very related, except for the fact that they do this extra work that they do, which is close work. Again, there was a study done in Norway that showed among higher education, there was like a 40% increase in myopia over the regular population that didn't go to higher education. These are older studies. To me, that tells me that there's, this link with doing extended amounts of near point work has something there. So, when they tell me that there is nothing that they can prove, and I agree with them that, I mean, they haven't been able to say 1-to-1 that this is exactly what's going on. And the fact that they can say that being outside is helpful, I can accept that as well.
Right.
Because, we did come out of the cave at one time and we were, into the light, that's very helpful for your eyes as well. So too much close work, too much darkened situations. Is it a matter of not having enough intense light inside? Is the light too low? I mean, I've seen studies in that where there's not enough lumens that we're working under indoors, when we do our close work. There's
Right.
all those questions. There's just too many variables here, what I mean,
Right.
to answer these questions. For me as a clinician, I intuitively feel that, it's related to their close work. I do. And I feel like that we should be addressing that kind of the part of the problem, even if we don't have a direct one-to-one link with it. I've seen some interesting stuff coming through recently. We talked about another meta study they kind of began to see that association. But I think it's incumbent on us as clinicians and professionals to deal with the close work. And basically that means that you have to start testing your patients at close work. You can't just do a distance prescription for your youngsters, especially. And you wouldn't do it with the adults because they need reading glasses. But I mean, you got to check the close up, what their functions are at close work.
Right.
So yes, from my standpoint of view, there's no question there is an association with close work. Whether it means that because you're doing so much in your point, you're not going outside, that's another question entirely. It's possible there might be, some of an answer in that, but I'm not sure that's the total answer, if you know what I mean. There's more to it than that.
No, I do know what you mean, because the points I wanted to bring up specifically is that, the doctors that I've worked with, the myopia coordinators, the ECPs that are doing myopia management, fitting ortho-K lenses, we talk about things that you should start looking for, because, this is preventative. Mm-hmm. And we'll get into that part later about why this is a bigger deal than they're making it out to be on this podcast. Right. But when I work with doctors, like over the last 20 years, I said, well, here are the things we need to start looking for. Are both parents myopic?
Right.
Or one or both of those parents myopic? Right. Mm-hmm. What is the ethnicity? Do you have an Asian or South Asian, patient? These kind of different factors. And screen time is a constant question. Mm-hmm. You need to be like, not just screen time at home, how much screen time at school? You know what I mean? Like, are they taking breaks? Are they observing, the 20/20 and now 2 rule that is in place, right? Like, are they getting enough times outdoors? Does diet, nutrition, do these things come into play, right? Because, when you started noticing these trends clinically speaking, mm-hmm. you noticed that myopia was increasing in your patients mm-hmm. at the same time in which a sedentary lifestyle started to increase, right? With the advent of like IBM computers back in the 80s,
desktops,
right? That's, as a clinician, that's when you started to notice in your patients
obesity and diabetes.
Right.
Two of the big things that were then on the radar mm-hmm. at that point for me as well, with myopia.
Right.
So I thought there was just definitely, and we went through all things. Was it increase in blood sugar? Was it having something to do with diet? Certainly, they say now, of course, studies show us that, it's sedentary lifestyles like smoking. It's that bad for you to sit around and not move around. So we know this is going on, and they're all kind of marching along here, all these. But what really floored me, Matt, on all this stuff was when they came to all this logic, right? And they came to these conclusions. They said, well, let's talk about some real diseases. Sure. That just was something that it was an eye opener, because it's like, they're not seeing what we're seeing. We fail to communicate that messaging. It hasn't happened. And we as a profession need to communicate better with our public, and yes, that's the lay people. It's just, there's just, you can't have those, this is a failure, and look, I think we have here a failure to communicate, we have big time failure. We see all this stuff coming out. I see the headlines coming out. I said, dang, look at that. Because I lived in an era where we had nothing. We were doing this on faith alone, just doing ortho-K for myopia control and the benefits of ortho-K. We were doing it on faith. Now there's all these studies that are coming out, but darn it, that it's not reaching the public. I mean, we're seeing the thing, and they're saying, "Wow, that's another. Here's another one that demonstrates what we're talking about." But yet that gap to public awareness isn't happening. So, we haven't stuck myopia up there with heart disease and diabetes and obesity and everything else. It's just not taken seriously. Yeah. And you're speaking specifically at what happened at the end of their segment, where several of the hosts echoed. I don't want to misrepresent what was said, but my summary of the reactions was, myopia is not that bad. Right. And isn't this what laser surgery is for and whatnot? Yeah, right. And exactly, I cannot expect somebody who's not in my industry to understand this at the severity level in which I see it, first and foremost. Well, and it's like I said, it's a failure from us, from the total, and here's, here we're on the other end of it too, working, with the companies, and at least I am now. And I'm trying to communicate with them and talk to them about application, why they need to go and do the education of the doctors, which is, I think, is a no-brainer.
Mm-hmm.
But here we have a bigger no-brainer, which is like, how are the doctors going to sell a product? And you do sell if the public doesn't realize how dangerous, this thing is to their vision.
Right.
So to me, this puts us right back into the 80s again. I mean, we're back trying to deal with a situation, and you get that viewpoint because you talk to the doctors and they say myopia is hard, right?
Mm-hmm.
I understand what that means. I had it hard in the 80s. They're back there again because they're having to do all that groundwork that should have been done by our associations, should have been done by industry itself. I mean, if you're expecting to put a product out, whether it's spectacles or soft contact lenses or Ortho-K or atropine or whatever it is you're putting out, or behavioral, devices for vision training, to have the market to market that in, you've got to create it. It just doesn't happen. It just doesn't say, okay, now it's time for a market. You have to make that happen. So it's like, there's this whole total failure in our industry, on myopia.
Yeah.
We don't have that problem with glaucoma.
Right.
Everybody gets glaucoma. Why was that? Because, okay, first of all, we weren't the main players there. It's ophthalmology was the main player, and they're doing things a lot more effectively in many cases than we are. And, that doesn't mean shame on us. It just means we need to observe and learn so we can, so there was and they had the National Institutes of Health, all these other government organizations working with them with glaucoma, to do the research and talk about it, the Steelers site, the silent Steelers site and everything else like that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. We got the National Institute of Health working with us with myopia,
Right.
But, are we got that level that they have with glaucoma? Are we communicating how serious this eye condition is? And I'd have to say, based on, what I've heard now, I had to relook at it again. I don't know, because it certainly was to have people feel that way, and take it so like it's not really a problem. I mean, it's like, I'm not happy with them. In fact, I think they did an excellent job.
Right.
I'm unhappy with the fact that we failed to communicate.
Yeah, like this. To kind of echo what you're saying is like, this is kind of depressing for me personally. When I was listening to this episode, because, like I said, I've listened to this show on and off for years. And just when I heard the words myopia epidemic came up, it's like the hair on my arms, like almost, I was like shocked. I was like, oh my gosh, what an amazing opportunity to hear how other people perceive this problem.
You can't, I was invaluable. You can't pay for that. To hear that.
Yeah. And I was generally pleased, generally speaking.
I was very pleased with this.
But the end result was a reflection back on us as an industry. And it's like, I thought we were doing a better job than we were back in the day. Right.
Apparently we're not.
Apparently not, because if this group of intelligent, learned professionals
they did the research
based on science who do the research are not understanding the severity of the problem,
because
then we didn't do our job, folks. Like those of you out there who do Ortho-K myopia management, those of you who are in this space, like we messed up again. You know what I mean? And I don't mean to be a negative Nelly here, but it's just like, it was kind of depressing to be like, if anybody, these guys should have gotten.
They're all doing projections. I know they're all doing projections like, oh, this field is going to be this or that. It's going to grow like this or that. Yeah. I mean, come on, let's start before the projections and start doing the work that has to be done to instead of just talking it up, doing the work that has to be done in our practices by our groups and associations in partnership with industry. Because the partnership with industry is the hugest thing we have, because that's how you get stuff done. Yeah, that's how the ADA did it with the tooth decay. It was that industry partnership that got together that made tooth decay number one on people's the charts here and people on TVs, everything else and computers, where they became aware that I need to do something about this. So let's roll up those sleeves and get to work. I think on the aspect of this, we had some ideas we talked about the aspect of this particular podcast, but there's some helpful things we can do.
Right? I'm glad you brought that up, because why don't you, as a clinician, why don't you, like, if you were responding to what they said, where myopia is not that bad, as a clinician, why don't you just say, look, in my clinical experience of over 40 years of dealing with the myopia epidemic, this is why it's important. So this is so go for it. This is your moment to explain why it's important.
Because, well, I think, we can see that argument has failed, actually, because somehow there's not enough of us.
All right, that's it for this regular version of the episode about dropping the ball on the myopia epidemic. If you're a paid supporter of the Myopia Mindset, if you went to myopiamindset.com and clicked on the subscriber button, you will get an extended version of this episode in which Cary and I talk even more about this topic. And I hope you do consider becoming a paid supporter because number one, you've made it this far, so I know you're interested. And number two, if you believe in what I'm doing, if you want to support my mission to spread information, motivation, education about myopia management, then please become a supporter. You can do so at myopiamindset.com and clicking on the subscriber button. Supporters get an extended version of every episode that we do, but they also get a bonus episode each and every month. And the bonus episode for this month is called Risking It All for Myopia Management. And I have Dr. Cary Herzberg come back on to the podcast with me for that. And if you are interested in that episode, if you believe in what I'm doing, for the price of a cup of coffee every single week, $12 a month, you can be a supporter too. Thank you so much for considering, and we'll see you at the next one.